now occurring. Thank you. Okay. So welcome to the launch of this issue of Garland, number 23. I'm speaking to you from Naarm, Melbourne, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to their ancestors past and present, and to the ancestors in the lands where you come from. And it's very special to have this particular issue, which straddles past and future, being launched today because there are so many interesting articles. So I want to say, firstly, to our Thinker-Maker, Pamela, greetings in Brisbane, to Songul Aral in Turkey, greetings, to Michelle Elliott. Are you in Sydney, Michelle?
I'm just south of Sydney on Dharawal country near Wollongong.
Great.
Thank you.
To Maria, are you in Sao Paulo?
I'm in Jundiaí. It's near São Paulo. It's in the interior.
Good. And Nina, currently in Venice. Salam.
Salam. Yeah, I'm currently in Venice.
And Michael is at Selamat Sore.
Selamat sore.
Yes. And which part of Indonesia are you in?
I'm in Surabaya.
Surabaya. Welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you.
And we have Sean from Melbourne. And Kirsty and Ril from Castlemaine. Greetings, and other people out there as well. So with your permission, I'd like to just bring up the issue that we're launching today and say a couple of words about it. So firstly, this issue is dedicated to the memory of Dr. Gada Hajiwe Kadume, who was past president of she was president of the World Craft Council before she sadly passed away due to a COVID infection earlier this year. And as president, she was dedicated to the preservation of craft heritage and had an unprecedented double presidency for 8 years of the Asia Pacific region, which is the largest region in the World Crafts Council, and was about to take on then the international presidency, which is currently managed by her son. And I'm very pleased that we'll soon be sharing a quite remarkable story from her grandson, Tarek Kadumi, who has produced this quite striking piece of work referencing the Palestinian homeland of the Kadumi family, working with some embroiderers from Jordan in that. So this story, even though it harkens back to a past memory, also has a future component to it as well. So this issue was part of the second journey of Garland to look at the divisions that have been revealed in the first journey in our world and to think about how they might connect. The first division was about humans and nature and the way in which it is possible to think about a good relationship, and that led to stories about stewardship and custodianship, particularly through the work of the Thinker-Maker at that time, Tyson Yunkaporta. And in this case, thanks to our pathfinders, we developed the concept of regeneration as one that helped us connect past and future. Regeneration as a kind of renaissance, kind of return to the beginning in order to replenish our culture, but with a sense of it being part of a life cycle, that there is a point at which it's good to go back to the seeds by which life evolved, in this case, particularly those objects that might otherwise lie on museum shelves that have potential to have a new life with us in different ways. So there are stories there that look at the past that is present in our world, and this was particularly informed by our Tongan advisors, according to the philosophy of Taoism, a precept of which is that the past is in front of us. And we'll be sharing a number of other posts by Kerry May Zagrabelna, who's a Māori jeweler, and will soon be celebrating Matariki, the Māori New Year, which will be occurring with the sighting of the Pleiades constellation on Friday, with the full moon as well. And recovering the past was very much stories about artifacts, and we'll be hearing from Grace, I think, is in the room, as well as Songul, about the artifacts that they connect with. Past meets future is looking at ways in which the elements that belong to heritage can have a different new kind of life. And Michael Kuniawan will be talking about the role of the museum in design education. Maria Fernanda Paes de Barros will be talking about the remarkable exchange called Waitara. And we also have Pallavi Hora and Shirley Bhatnagar, their piece about Sindhu and the history of the Indus Valley. And Pamela also then at the end will give a presentation reflecting on her residency at the Substation 33, which is a very interesting way of thinking about the past, not just as a pre-modern past, but a technical past as well in terms of electronic waste. And we'll also have Michelle here in the final section, which was reflecting on how it is that we say goodbye to the past, given the fact that that's also something that must happen as well. So if we go back up here in terms of those who might briefly speak to their articles, I wonder, Grace, are you in the room? I saw you.
Yes,
Grace, you there?
I'm
Yes.
here. Yeah,
Great.
getting some light happening.
Good. Do you want to just speak briefly to your article?
Hello. So, hello everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. Heirloom, I don't know if any of you have read the story, but Heirloom came about after an engagement with my deceased Polish grandmother, who I never knew and who was never spoken about. And I found out more about her after my father died. So it was very much about engaging with the ghost and death and trauma. And my grandmother was deported under Stalin to a work camp in Siberia where she died. So in a way, I was looking at initially inherited trauma and silenced memory and intergenerational trauma and how that can be passed on from generation to generation. My father was a refugee to Australia and never spoke about his past. So after he died and I found some letters that were written by my grandmother, it started this project, which of course wasn't heirloom to start with. So that's an image there that you can see of her in a coffin. And it came about after many years of having this photograph and the 4 letters. There was only 4 letters in my possession. I came to understand this notion of making and paper flowers, and that women were contained in this world. It was mostly women who were deported to Siberia under Stalin, women and children. So you can see in this photograph, it's mostly women. There's one man in the photo, and my grandmother in the coffin, and it's the flowers atop her coffin after I'd had this photo for, gosh, close over 10 years. It finally dawned on me after I'd been going down that process of engaging with trauma and understanding what had happened and exploring that history, which I initially knew nothing about. I looked at that photo and I thought, wow. So they wouldn't be fresh flowers at all because one, they're in Siberia, these women, and look how cold it looks. They're all in fur, and flowers like that don't grow in Siberia. And then I realized that there was a whole tradition of paper flower making that happened across Europe in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And not only that, atop my grandmother's head were these flowers that were placed like the traditional, in Polish it's called wianek, which translates as wreath. And so they were placed atop her head as in the traditional flower crown, which was usually worn by young girls or women before they were married. So it started from that, and it was more a process of discovery. So the work that I make is based on the traditional wianek, but I actually use vintage souvenir linen tea towels, Australiana tea towels. And I'd learned and discovered and came across one, was actually a tablecloth that was made in Poland. So it was an Australiana, beautiful vintage linen Australiana souvenir tablecloth, but it was made in Poland. And it sent me down this trajectory of exploring these ideas around making and items and how we look at things from a face value, but what about the origins of the fabric? So yeah, so my project started from that, and out of that now I weave these flower crowns. Each one is unique and different. I use vintage linen Australiana tea towels, specifically made in Poland, and it was a thing between the 60s and the 90s, and Poland then was a communist country, so that in itself is an area that I'm exploring and that I've been looking at more. COVID has put a hold on that because I can't get back to Poland to research it further. But I also use the threads that I use are Japanese silk and linen threads, and that connects to my grandson who's half Japanese and lives in Japan. And yeah, so beeswax, natural materials I use. In that one you can see there's some vintage rabbit fur. I also use parchment, as in animal skin, that I made from a project earlier. So it's this project around exploring notions of the ephemeral wild and women's historical containment, and freeing that up through this exploration and this making of these flower crowns. So very much a celebration, whereas the original project was about exploring the wound and engaging with trauma. Out of that has come this project, which I consider, it brings me so much joy. So yeah, it's something I'm really passionate about.
Right. Thank you very much, Grace. It certainly shows how objects can connect across generations and time, and finding objects such as these that also speak to a certain way of life, rituals of adornment that are very rare to find these days, also opens up different possibilities. I can certainly see how this would evolve further in your work. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And if we could go on to Turkey now. Songul, are you with us? Still?
Yes.
Hello, Songul. We seem to have lost your image.
Hi. My work, a traditional woman's. Yes.
Yes, tell us about your work,
You
please.
hear me? You hear me?
Yes.
Yes. My work, a traditional woman's jewelry, silver and gold crest, to the present day using weaving techniques. Copper wires warped. I made my workbench by striking the nails of on the shelf of an old cabinet in a semicircle suitable for the heat size. I blended silk floss thread with waxed gold thread and combined my weaving and creative technique. Finally, I cut the silkworm cocoon in half and painted it and formed the wool ends. In Anatolia, women who carried their treasure on their heads were used as sentences in the past because if a woman is in a very difficult financial situation one day, the treasure is always with her to save her. Umarım anlatabildim. The roots of this culture are quite a long story, as handcrafts are a part of in life in Anatolia in women's. They are not considered as an ordinary job. Far from the point of view of the modern world, we can say that its value is not at the desired level. People who are not aware of the disappearance of crafts don't know much about the conservation culture. That's why it's amazing to know that works like Garland and Kevin protect all their crafts. Please write your message to me in writing if you have any question, because my speaking very good, not good English. I wish you stay healthy, and I hope that we'll meet with more articles from now on. Stay healthy until we meet again with my endless love. The rest is easy.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for speaking in English. We should be speaking in Turkish now to return the favor that you give us in speaking in English. But it's very interesting. Like Grace, your work looks back to experience of your grandmother and your background, and trying to develop something from that brings some of its beauty to the world today. So it's interesting to see how this can occur in very different cultures as Turkey and Australia. If we go to Brazil now, to Maria. Are you there, Maria?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, lovely.
Well, hi everyone. My English is not that good also, so I hope you can understand me. I wrote about Moitará. Moitará is the base of indigenous cultures here in Brazil. It's the way they make they exchange things, as they are not able to do everything they need. So they exchange between the villages to get objects that they cannot produce by their own. And I went to Calpana village in the indigenous territory of Xingu in December 2019. And well, I was, for me, it's like entering in another dimension. And I am a designer and an artist, and I try to work with artisans all over the country and like translate their stories through my design. And when I was at Calpana village and I participated in a Moitará, it was very impressive for me, because the base of Moitará is trust and respect, and something that in big cities sometimes seems lost. So actually, only after I came back and I began to create and talk to them, to try to understand more, to make a good translation of their stories, I realized that what we've done what is also a moitara. It's not an exchange of objects, but it was also a kind of exchange built in respect and trust. And this is when they tell me about their lives, the way they live, their traditions, and I pay homage to them by creating objects and furniture that can tell their stories all around the world. And this is for me very, very touching, because going back to my past, my ancestors, I discovered recently that they are the ones, the Pais de Barros, that discover Mato Grosso, where this village is. So my ancestors were the ones who only see the gold that were there and not see the richness of their cultures. And now I'm doing the opposite way. So for me, it's really very, very emotional.
Obrigado. Thank you so much, Maria. And I certainly recommend not only reading Maria's article, but also looking at the brief video of the Moitara. I'm sure it's a very complex exchange. And it's remarkable now you share with us how you discovered something about your ancestors and their relationship to this land. And I think that speaks for relationships between settlers and indigenous that are fraught, are difficult, but important challenges shared among many different countries. And I'm sure we'll have other stories like that in the future in Garland. So thank you so much, Maria. Now I would like to welcome Michael. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Good, wonderful.
Yes, thank you for having me here. In my article, I discuss the story of how my student created a book based on the artifact that we displayed, exhibited in the university museum. So the story is about how I discovered during my MA at UCL, University College London, Institute of Education, where I discovered that the museum actually was the design's laboratory and an integral part of the design higher education. So I was investigating how designer should approach the past, because I believe that artists and designers cannot be truly separated, cannot totally reject the past, especially past cultural heritage. So I created the museum at the university, and I used my course in art and culture. I asked my students to learn about the object, the artifacts, and also we had an archaeologist shared his story, the history of Majapahit kingdom related to the artifacts that was displayed. And from then on, the students learned to create their own cultural product. So I believe that what Professor Rodney Harrison said, the definition of cultural heritage is something that is co-created in the present based on the past for the future. I paraphrase that. But yeah, the spirit is there. I believe that designer should be responsible for what they create, because their creation, my students' creation, is part of the future heritage. So I believe that there should be a critical awareness on how higher education educate designers to approach the past. So that's my mission. That's what I've been doing in the Center for Creative Heritage Studies. I wish that Indonesia someday will be able to look at the past more critically, not just a resource for the creative industry, but it is a way to create a better future for the world. So my article is, yeah, that's the story about how I get to this point and how I use museum as part of the design higher education system.
Terima kasih, Michael. That was wonderful. And it's
Thank
particularly
you.
important as often design education in non-Western countries seems to imply that students need to make a break with their past, to
Yeah,
embrace modernity in different forms, whereas what you are presenting here is quite an important new model. New, I say, but it's really about finding a connection between the past, as you say, in the present, between the past and the future. And we look forward
yes.
to many more stories like that to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if we can go to India now, Shirley, can you speak to us?
Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
There you are.
I hope you can hear me.
We can, yes.
All right. So this particular project was created during the pandemic. We got a grant, Pallavi and me, from the Serendipity Arts Foundation to kind of take the word kintsugi and do something with it. The end, they wanted a film at the end of it. And at around the same time, I had collected a lot of images with Indus Valley pottery. So I'm sure all of you heard that Indus Valley pottery or Indus Valley civilization is kind of like one of the oldest civilizations in the world. And India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, we kind of, how do you say, draw culturally, we kind of, it's our history. It's really important to us. However, and being a ceramicist and a designer, what shocked me while I was researching that I hadn't seen these images. I've been doing ceramics for 25 years and I'd done a project with Indus Valley about like 4 or 5 years ago, and there was nothing on the internet. And it was a little shocking that suddenly there were so many images on the internet. And as I started collecting them, I realized that they were mostly on auction sites like eBay, live auctioneers. These auction sites or galleries which were dealing with antique were basically based in Europe, some in North America, and no information, very, very little information. So how do you talk about this loss? We can't see it. There's very little information on it. And we decided to kind of make a film on a topic we did not know about, but wanted to celebrate. Because how do archaeologists, how do historians how do people gauge how things old are? What was the culture? A lot of it is to do with pottery, because pottery is the only thing that survives, either as shards or as complete products. So this is kind of like a, how do you say, a celebration of something that we cannot see or touch. But we kind of took images, and Pallavi's role was really important as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, that how do you put the whole thing together. So this was a wonderful collaborative project for me, in which we're kind of telling a story about ancient pottery in a interesting way, like a song. And that's why it's like Sindhu, a subterranean song. And Sindhu is the ancient name of the river Indus. So we kind of played with these idea of shards, like shards are basically an incomplete picture. And then it comes together, and it also then refers back to kintsugi. I hope that was clear enough.
Dhanyavad, thank you so much, Shirley. And a little like Michael, it's particularly interesting to see that this is a way of dealing with archaeology, which is usually something about extracting objects to go into museum shelves or universities, but to give it a kind of a living creative energy today, which reflects to an extent the issue we had on China, Ancient Now, which also saw a similar kind of energy. So it's great that you could share that with us. Thanks, Shirley. Before we go to Pamela, Michelle, would you like to speak about tender cloths?
I will. Thank you, Kevin. This work here that you see is really a coming together of some different materials that I'd been collecting, but the centerpiece is the cloth that you see there. And it was made as part of a residency that I've been engaged with for about 3 years now at a community-run, not-for-profit funeral organisation. And the work that, or part of the work that I do for them is to create wrapping cloths for people that come into their care who may have passed away in difficult circumstances or who sometimes come without family. So part of their ritual is to care for that person's body, and we create these cloths as a kind of final gesture of care. And the work that I've make myself is kind of become enmeshed with the work that I do at Tender. So I'm very much interested in the life of objects, in the history of objects and the history of materials. So we can see Danny Young Lynch here, who was a young person that I worked with very soon after the death of her father. And we sat together and created an embroidery. And at the time, we weren't really sure what the purpose of the work would be, but it was to spend time with her whilst her mother was with her partner, with Danny's father, as a way to just spend time and engage with whatever she was feeling at the time. So we made an embroidery, and as it turned out, the embroidery worked as an object of transformation, but also as an object of letting go. And she created this lovely embroidery, which was based on a drawing that she'd done. And she then asked if it was possible for her to go in and see her father to say goodbye, but that she was somehow she was reluctant to take that step, and she used the cloth as a I kind of think of it as a bridge. So over the time that we sat together and she made that, in some way she undertook this emotional journey that allowed her to go in and say goodbye to her father. It was quite a moving experience for me, but for her as well. And so the work that I have been doing with Tender kind of seeps into my own practice, in that I'm constantly kind of thinking about the history of materials and the way that we engage with materials, and that process of making as a way that we might connect with the past. And I was interested particularly in what you were saying, Michael, about and Shirley as well, about how objects can sit in the present. So we're engaged with them as makers and looking at how they might speak to the work that we make, but with that sense of time and the connection to the past. And then that we're, through the making, we're gifting these objects to the future. And so, yeah, that was some of the work that I'd done with Tender, which had also incorporated some of my own collecting into the piece that you'll see at the beginning of the article. So, yeah, the story is a collection of fragments, and I think that the idea of fragments and time and sitting between past and future is quite an important one. So I'll leave it there because I'm just aware we've got quite a lot of some other speakers to hear from. So thanks everybody.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And it's interesting that with stories like Shirley's and Grace's, Sungul, it's partly about finding an object from the past, whereas you're almost working in the other direction. You're finding an object now that can go back into the past in some way and make that connection. So it's a wonderful way of rounding it off. Now,
thank you.
I don't think there's anybody else here to speak before Pamela. So Pamela is the thinker-maker for this particular issue and someone who we've recently designated as a perennial. That's somebody who contributes at least 3 articles to Garland magazine. And particularly in this case as what we might call a Renaissance woman, somebody who is able to embrace both the technologies of both old and new craft with an understanding of culture and many other domains, which I'm sure she won't have time to touch on tonight. But her paper, which has just recently been put into the issue on Substation 33, is a particularly interesting experience looking at Brisbane collective working with electronic waste, 3D recycling and so on, and 3D printing, looking at its social life today and what it means for people who are involved in that program. So I think it's a very interesting engagement in a world of objects that we don't normally associate with heritage, but are part of the detritus of our lives as we constantly upgrade various devices and so on, and ways in which meaning might be recovered from that. Pamela can share with us. So welcome, Pamela. Would you like to, I'll just make sure I've got
I can share screen. I've got a presentation. I think I'm not sure if that works. I just push the green button and then it should come up. Is that?
Yeah, that's right.
I'll have a go at that. So it's just share screen. Can you see? You can see a very messy screen, I think there. Okay. So I discussed with Kevin about the prospect, because the title was a Thinker-Maker residency. The term maker was really interesting, a fit into the context of craft, because I think in the 21st century, when we discuss makers, they're often they're kind of people who love to make, but they're not necessarily ones that have highly developed specific skills in certain areas. At least this is the idea that's very appealing to a whole community that is engaged in it. But the other side is too that I'm not sure if any of you would have read Chris Anderson. He was a journalist and he writes other forms of literature, obviously, but he wrote The Makers, the New Industrial Revolution that was published in 2012. Not sure if that rings a bell with anybody at all, but it's quite an important, insightful book. And he kind of calls a close to a cycle that began arguably with the Industrial Revolution. And there was another writer, a critic of that time, John Ruskin, and he talked about a separation between design and making. So Michael might have some feelings about this too. And he was quite, he didn't really appreciate that. He was a draftsman himself. And so because the Industrial Revolution was so much about modularization, the division of labor, this new revolution, which Anderson was calling for in this century, talks about kind of this reunion of these roles, and through using technologies such as 3D printing. And the other thing that I might flag before I continue in this discussion is one thing I actually found it really quite hard, is because I was looking at the model of social enterprise, and I hadn't, until I undertook the residency, realized the strong connection it has with a colonial equivalent, which are the missions. But we will talk about that in a sec, I guess. Just to introduce the host organization properly, Substation 33, it's best known for recycling electronic waste into goods such as, they have these water buoys that are solar powered, and they're able to relay remotely information about pH level or oxygen, things that are very useful. Another product, their flagship product, is called the Power Wells, which are presently being exported to Indonesia. So these are sets of like recycled laptop batteries. They've been retrieved from our electronic waste, and they've been made into units that store electricity that are acquired through, again, solar power for villages. And they're really fantastic. And the people that construct them, they're residents that are local to Logan City. So if you're not familiar with the geography, Logan City is between Brisbane and the Gold Coast. It's the 5th largest local government area in Queensland, but it also has a lower socioeconomic index. And it engages over 500 local residents a year who experience barriers to employment. I'm just going to quickly explain this artwork that we have up here, because each of us, as part of the residency, we are also creating things as part of so we're thinking and we're making. And I wanted to capture some of these ideas into a material form. So what you see there are a number of they're 3D prints. So I've gone and modeled them in using computer-aided design, and then I printed them using a couple of processes. The beetle is a symbol of renewal in many cultures, so I thought that he was quite important, but I did him in resin. So that's actually the original form of 3D printing that emerged in 1983 from America, using photosensitive bath and a laser and a mirror to very precisely solidify in layers the form. But you can, coming back to this notion Ruskin put forward, that where we're combining again the design and the making and craftsmanship, if you will, it requires quite a high level of skill, not only just to do the design in this case, but also then to sit and trim off all these. You can see the little bits of what they call support material. To hold it together, anything that overhangs, because it's printing out in layers, they have to join it to something so it connects up as a form, but they had to be removed, and it has to be hand finished and very carefully painted, that sort of thing. And I have to note too that I did my PhD recently, and that focused on electronic digital technologies, but I essentially paper cut. I make things out of paper. So this is probably the first occasion I've actually just done something on the computer, and it's quite drastically different. But if you see the design there, you kind of, how I learned, I found it very difficult, obviously, for anybody who's used to working in the material realm. But modeling in 3D is actually not that different to modeling, say, in clay. If you take into account, there was in the 15th century a writer named Leon Battista Alberti, and he described modeling as a combination of adding and removing material. So for some sculptors, they add like literally with clay, and others will remove, say if you're carving into a block of marble. So I sort of learned using that philosophy to do this digitally, and I've actually replicated a number of different objects that I found around Substation 33. So this is, I've got some images of people working there and some of the volunteers. So the process they use is they collect all different pieces of electronic waste from the community, and the volunteers, who may range from people in correctional services to people with disabilities and others that are working for the dole, they sit there and meticulously take things apart, and they sort it into various, I think around over 90% is actually reused in another form. So you might note that with both the missions and then social enterprise, they're often utilizing materials which are existent within those communities. So they're found in there's already supply of them. And then they're often based on some level of labor. And certainly, I'm talking about the 19th century iteration, provision of labor and trying to get people to settle in one area was really important at the time to conversion. So it's in, I don't think many of you from Australia, Queensland actually, but in the north of the state where I'm living, a very good example is the Yarrabah community, which really celebrates Indigenous Australian art and craft. But originally in the late 19th century, early 20th century, they did this also, but it was the Church of England mission. And the key difference, I think, today with organizations such as Substation 33, it does have a Christian origin. It is part of the youth and family services, which evolved from the Christian Brothers of Logan. Is that they don't try to express, to impress upon their clients, they would call them clients now, their Christian values, not overtly. But at the same time, people come as early as 6:30 in the morning because it's a safe place for some of these people. Obviously, have issues at home with domestic violence, but they're provided food, they're provided pastoral care as well, this kind of level of support. In terms of craft, I mean, this is where it kind of gets tricky. There's a professor in America, an associate professor named Anna Ferreira, and she separates, she likes to separate the word manufacture into its roots, manu and then factura. So we're talking about manu by hand and then factura to make. But factura is also the root word for factories. And so this is coming back then to Karl Marx's notion of the division of labor beginning in the 16th century. And it's also what is considered by a lot of people, the beginning of manufacturing. But I'm interested in a much broader, I'm sorry, I've got a daughter, I'm just worried she's milling outside. But a broader application of the term, as in the repetitive processing of materials using labor to produce objects. And if we think of that, obviously this is, again, you're using your hands and there's material that we're processing with labor. It actually dates back to, say, the Paleolithic era when you're thinking about flint spearheads. But also, I think we were talking before with Shirley about ceramics. So Yangshao pottery is Neolithic, and they were used for burial urns around 5000 BCE. So within this definition of manufacturing, you can also incorporate craft, and I think that's really significant. Another example is that one of the volunteers that goes regularly, to Substation 33, he takes the cords from your appliances that you would have around the home, he strips them and he salvages the copper wire inside, and then it's straightened out, and then it's stretched around these pieces of plastic in two directions separated by sticky tape. And then he solders them together, and this forms a transformer, which allows the electricity to be converted, I think, within some electronic items that are produced at the center. So again, it's interesting because it's quite laborious, but it requires a lot of skill. But then, I mean, is it craft? It's going back to John Ruskin, again, in 19th century, there's sort of the separation of design and the making, again, because someone else has come up with this design, and then you have people on the floor sort of working to create these objects. But others will partake in design. So some volunteers and staff in the office also, they do things such as create circuit boards. Sometimes it's a designated circuit board for a product, but other times they're actually creating prototypes as well. Other volunteers will do 3D modeling, some do 3D printing and laser cutting too. And just to show you the products themselves, we have this is called a smart buoy. So B-O-U-Y, a buoy, which I mentioned before, that relays the information about the water temperature and salinity and things like that to a remote location. And then this is also the power well. So you can see the batteries there that have been retrieved from old laptops. But also even this casing has been laser cut from old LCD screens. So like the computer that you might be interacting with us using, that screen has been separated and then repurposed. So I think that they are very, very clever. 3D printers, they not only 3D print casings using recycled plastic, plastic that they've extruded into filament in a pellet form, this is. So it sort of melts there and it becomes this, the material which the printers use. But 3D printers themselves have been, the materials are by and large salvaged from electronic waste. So I'm just going to talk now, though, to some of the resident creatives, and in the sense that whilst this is not an identity-based social enterprise, I was talking about an Indigenous community that a social enterprise that produces objects that are exported or even sold domestically, and those profits are distributed in a very small geographic area, and the main purpose is, again, is to support that community. It's not about deriving profit. But the other side of that is that you're seeing the identity of that community also being proliferated within those objects, because their ideas and their values manifest aesthetically into them. This sort of is not really happening that much at Substation 33. There isn't a market for that at the moment, but I will show you some jewelry in a sec that a couple of the staff members have been making. But what has happened inadvertently is that the staff themselves, they are given room to explore their own ideas. And so Dan, who has fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, this is his barrier to finding other forms of employment. He comes every day to assist with the 3D printing of objects for the manufactured items. But whilst these objects are on the printers, whilst they're being made, he makes his own. So he hasn't received any training external to the organization, and yet he's able to create designs which are incredibly complex. Some of these models have been modified from open source files online, but others he's actually created from promotional still images. So he just sits there and very carefully manipulates the boundaries of shapes and joins them together. So I think it's really remarkable. But what's even more interesting is what he's doing with it, in that over the past 2 years, he's been trying to create this suit so he can become one of his favorite characters, which is the Predator from a science fiction series. And I asked him what it was in particular that he liked about it, about this alien species. He said they have a will to survive and they're honorable. So in this sense, I think that there's a level of reflexiveness in his actions too. So what I decided to do from that point onwards was to create a reflexive activity with some of the other volunteers. And they were not, it's interesting because they change all the time. So the set of volunteers that they have, but the period of sort of 6 to 8 weeks that I was there coming in, the group, I got to know them a little bit. Many of them were really, really, there were two kinds. I mean, the first was really engaged with taking things apart. It's fun, right? But they enjoyed having this identity of a worker when they came in, on those days. Some of them came in with external services, so they had quite pronounced disability, but it's something they felt that they felt a part of. But another group with the Work for the Dole participants, they had a quota to produce, so then there was another barrier to participation because they really needed to do their hours. but I asked them, because the word parts, in additive manufacturing and 3D printing, in that industry, things that are produced, they're not kind of artworks, they're called parts, because often they're parts of larger things. And so I asked the participants what part they felt or would like to play in the community. And then it was, in a way, getting to think about themselves and be reflexive. So you sort of have here, I'll quickly finish up because I can see, the time, but one of the participants was Matthew. If you see up there, I don't know if you can see my arrow at all. You can, or yes. So this is a tree. So they had the option of drawing, or I brought in some clay too, some polymer clay, or some of them actually were really great and they tried 3D modeling themselves. So in this case, Matthew, he used to be a gardener. As to why he's not doing that anymore wasn't really discussed with us, and that's fine. But he saw himself like this tree with a really thick trunk and a full head of leaves. And I thought it was really reflective of his character, because he was so productive and really reliable, stalwart. And then we have on the other side of the screen, Roy, who was a fresh graduate from, from the Queensland University of Technology in business and information technology. And he modeled his own sphere. And I thought this is really interesting because he sort of is really well-rounded in his skills. So this again kind of reflected his philosophy on life as well. And the last one I'll quickly talk to you about is the car, because that was one of the work for the DOL participants. It took some time out, and he was really interested in modeling. So he did a drawing, and then he kind of had a go at making this car with me. I did have to help him quite a bit, but he'd injured his hand, and he used to be a butcher and concreter, and he'd come in, he chose Substation 33 because he was interested in finding out whether or not this was a new career path for him. And so again, this car was a really good symbol for this period of transition in his life. This is, you can see, this is Dan's kind of gun laser thing that he ended up modeling and printing out. And you see all the little pieces that are being glued together. It's quite amazing, the care that he's taken. So there's sort of other objects that were printed. This is part of a much larger display too of objects from Substation 33. And I just want to draw your attention to I didn't actually write about the jury because it being a social enterprise, they were very focused on still making an income. And the jury wasn't something that was looking like a viable product. And yet I thought it was really important because it changed the way people look at e-waste. So it made it look really beautiful, and I think that's really important too. So I think that's the last of my slides. I'm hoping to have to given you some things to discuss, although I'm aware we're kind of over time now.
I think we've got a little time just simply to raise some questions and issues. If anyone's got something that they would like to ask Pamela or comment, please feel free. Pamela, I think it would be interesting to know a little bit more about, in Substation 33, how they regard the technology, the waste, in the context of, say, the hipster generation. You've got certain inventive uses of outmoded technologies like CD, certainly vinyl, and there's a kind of an interest in appreciating something that's been abandoned in the product cycle. Or is it more about something like what the Japanese called motonai, in a sense of a feeling of needing to provide a new purpose for something that's been discarded? Was there any nostalgia in what they were doing?
I probably, as you mentioned it, motonai is more, is probably a more accurate kind of interpretation. They find it as a really valuable resource. So it makes me think, I mean, this is very sci-fi, and I forgot to mention that this use of the technology in general, with 3D printing, that the practitioners, they're trying to transcend fiction. So they like to make things which are not quite real. But I'm just, why I'm saying that in reference to your question was that if any of you have seen the second Blade Runner film, and they have this scene where all these children are going through all the waste and trying to retrieve like things like copper and other minerals that can be reused. It's so valuable. And yet I think with Substation, everything, so it's also repurposing people. There's a cat that sort of came in, and it's just called Subby, and so everything is really highly valued. But I don't know if it's so much hipster. At its core, there are engineers that are there that are trying to solve problems using this resource. So they also make things such as floodwater signs, educational. They're trying to look at educational equipment and things like that. They're looking at fulfilling needs with resources are abundantly available.
Thank you.
I'm quite amazed that something like that exists, Kevin. Like this residency, which Pamela, you spoke about. I couldn't imagine the kind of concerted effort. I just started reading the article. I'm sorry I hadn't read it before. So it's quite mind-boggling to see the kind of effort. So I will go through it.
It takes the Thinker-Maker residency beyond just simply experimenting with materials and putting it into a social context, which is quite surprising.
I just would hope that, because we're all aware that waste is a problem all over the world, that there might be other models emerging, and that we start to see this material as a resource, and particularly creatively. So I mean, why I'm saying that is because other social enterprise they might use, for instance, wool, if that's in abundance in a community, or they're weaving some other plant material too. But you're correct in thinking that it is quite unusual, but I hope it becomes more common over time.
So Jenin asks about the reactions. Obviously, there are practical objects like the power wells that go to Indonesia. In terms of the creative works, have they reached any audience beyond Substation 33?
We've just put up a display at the Logan Central Library. It's not something they've looked into before, because these are really wonderful, resourceful, but not necessarily the most creative. I mean, they are creative in finding new applications, but I think in terms of the aesthetic, these kind of values that artists place on these things, cultural ones, they're very focused on functionality. And I think they're doing a great job, but they're more sort of like, during COVID, there was an issue with a lot of people in their area, socio-economically, they had challenges, so they needed to repurpose a lot of laptop computers so these kids could actually do their schoolwork, that sort of thing. So that's kind of where their energy is placed, but they haven't seemed to put very much emphasis at all on the aesthetics.
Well, we'll see what might come of this article. And just before we finish up, I think Shirley's reflecting on the quality of jugaad in India, which is seen in the informal markets and places like Dharavi and in Mumbai, where much waste is repurposed in ingenious ways. Is this what you were thinking of, Shirley?
Yes. Sorry, my connection may not be that great today. Yes, exactly, but it's not done formally, like there's no one here. It's a community which kind of recycles waste, but we are not looking at it formally, unlike this Substation 33. That's what I'm finding interesting, that a different part of society is looking at it like that.
Yes, well, it's interesting to have it in a religious context. in the case of subsection 33. And it's remarkable that you've been able to see that, Pamela. I don't think others have, although there was an essay when we did the quarterly essays by Alice Pung, an author about Vipu Srilalasa, whose work is defined by cuteness. And she was able to see that this was a particularly Buddhist aesthetic, because cuteness is something devoid of personality, which is similar to the Buddha. And so it's these readings which I think open up interesting ways of thinking about things. So thank you everyone for sharing this, your stories, looking at the past and the present. And I think it's particularly refreshing when, you know, we think about the contemporary and the future as something which easily transcends the past, that the past is something we assume is always subject to upgrades of various kinds, and that there may be something left behind that has a potential that hasn't been fully realized, is reflected in your stories. So if you'd like to show yourselves, if it can, but so we can do a Zoom group portrait to finish as a ritual, where we can put on our best face, not our kind of distracted Zoom face, our blank Zoom face, but that would be a very nice memento of today. So if you'd like to just count down. Songul, you're typing. Hello, Songul. Good. One.
Yes,
two,
yes, please, please give me a few minutes. While
Okay.
listening to you, I am trying to grasp the words that I don't understand by looking at the
Okay, we
translation
just do
programs. At the same time, I
okay.
turn off the screen so as not to distract you.
Sure. Thank
I
you.
guess you, I guess you will have to learn well, like our handcrafts used in words. I want to make a few last words.
Mhm.
I don't remember how it happened. I suddenly saw a weaver woman, weaver woman on a page, and was directed to her story. I first meet Grant Garland magazine on its page. Different culture and different manufacturers from all over the world had brought their handcrafts together in this magazine. Many stories of incredible beauty. Garland has built a wonderful world by recruiting artisans, and I am sorry, I am too late. I would like to thank my teacher Kevin, who corrected the text of my article. I wrote accidentally, although there were many mistakes. He humbly replied to my email. He is incredibly patient, and thank you very much for designing this beautiful union garland. Dear Kevin, I will send you my teacher because you are the teacher of keeping a craft alive without dying. I read every issue of your magazine with interest, and I as I read it, I feel sorry for meeting you late.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Songul. And it's great to have
Umarım doğru anlattım.
a
Evet.
source of stories from Turkey, which has such a rich culture that we haven't had before. It's
Yeah.
been a missing piece. And
Very thank you. Very thank you.
certainly we are all Garland in the sense that it's an open structure and it's really dependent on the kinds of stories that we all contribute. So thank you so much there. We'll just try for that group portrait again, if we count down. I'll just get rid of that chat. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Great. Some beautiful smiles there. Terrific. Thank you so much. I'll share that with you by email. And So coming up next, we have part of the Reinventing the Wheel series, Tricia Flanagan, which I think will be an interesting connection to what you're doing, Pamela. She's based in Sydney and she's doing work on new technologies that record our finger movements. And she's been working with Miao people in China, embroiderers, to try and look at ways in which we can record their finger movements. So it raises a lot of issues about who owns that kind of knowledge. It should be quite interesting. Then we've got interesting presentations from China and Japan after that. So it's a very rich conversation. I think made all the more rich when we're all locked down and can't travel to each other's countries. So at least we have this. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the stories.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
See new faces, Nina.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
And have a good day. Bon dia, Maria.
Thank you. Good
Very much
night.
appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. Enjoy your breakfast. Thank you, Songul.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.